Some wars begin with a gunshot. Some begin with a speech. But this war began with a question that no one has ever answered. Who owns the Middle East? Who controls its oil, its land, its future? Who decides which people live free and which people live in fear? For more than 40 years, three powers have circled each other like wolves in the desert: the United States, Iran, and Israel, each one convinced it is right, each one willing to fight to prove it. What you're about to hear is not just the story of bombs and missiles. It is the story of broken promises, of old wounds reopened, of small sparks that became enormous fires. It is a story that began long before any of us were born. And as of the year 2026, it is still not over. This is the Hidden War, and this is how it started. Chapter 1: A Country on Fire. The 1953 coup and the roots of rage. To understand why Iran hates America, you must go back to the year 1953. Iran was not always America's enemy. For a time, it was something close to a partner. But in 1953, the United States and Britain did something that Iranians have never forgotten. They took away Iran's choice. A man named Mohammad Mossadegh had been elected as Iran's prime minister. He was popular. He was educated. He believed that Iran's oil belonged to the Iranian people, not to foreign companies. So he did something bold. He took control of the oil industry. He told the British oil companies to leave. Britain was furious. So Britain went to America and asked for help. And America agreed. The CIA, working secretly, organized protests. They paid people to cause chaos in the streets. They worked with Iranian military officers. And within days, Mossadegh was gone. He was arrested. He was put on trial. He spent the rest of his life under house arrest. The Shah, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, was put back in power. He was pro-American. He was cooperative. And for the next 26 years, he ruled Iran with an iron fist. American weapons filled his army. American money filled his treasury. American advisors helped train his secret police, known as SAVAK, one of the most feared intelligence organizations in the world. SAVAK arrested people without reason. SAVAK tortured prisoners. SAVAK silenced anyone who dared to question the Shah. To Washington, Iran was a valuable friend in a dangerous region. To millions of Iranians, it was a dictatorship that existed only because America allowed it. That wound never healed. It is the beginning of everything that follows. Chapter 2: The Revolution. 1979, the year the world changed. By the late 1970s, Iran was boiling. The Shah had tried to modernize the country. He had built roads, schools, and hospitals. He had given women the right to vote. He had launched what he called a white revolution. But he had also silenced every voice that challenged him. There were no free elections. There was no free press. There was no freedom at all. And beneath it all was a man the Shah had exiled 15 years earlier. A cleric with a long white beard and cold, determined eyes. His name was Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini. From exile, first in Iraq and then in France, Khomeini had been sending messages back to Iran on cassette tapes. His voice traveled through mosques and homes, through markets and schools. He told the Iranian people that the Shah was a puppet of America, that Islam was under attack, that revolution was not just a right, it was a duty. Millions d'Istend. In 1978, the streets of Iran filled with protesters. Not hundreds, not thousands. Millions. Workers went on strike. Oil production collapsed. Soldiers began to question their orders. The Shah tried to make promises. He said he had heard the voice of the people. He said things would change, but it was too late. On January 16, 1979, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi boarded a plane and left Iran. He would never return. 2 weeks later, on February 1st, 1979, Ayatollah Khomeini landed in Tehran. Millions of people flooded the streets to meet him. Some wept, some cheered, some carried his photograph like a holy image. Within days, the monarchy collapsed. The Islamic Republic of Iran was born. It was a revolution unlike any the world had seen. not led by soldiers or party officials, but by a cleric carrying a book, not a gun. Khomeini immediately made his position clear on two things above all others. First, America was the enemy. He called it the Great Satan. Second, Israel had no right to exist. He called it a cancerous tumor that must be removed. These were not empty words. They became the founding principles of a nation. They shaped every policy, every alliance, every conflict that came after. The world had changed. Nothing would be the same. Chapter 3: Black Friday and the Fall of the Shah. Before Khomeini returned, the streets of Iran had already turned red. On September 8, 1978, the Shah declared martial law. Protesters gathered anyway in Jaleh Square in Tehran. Soldiers opened fire. Dozens were killed. Some say hundreds. The exact number was never confirmed. The day became known as Black Friday. It did not stop the revolution. It accelerated it. After Black Friday, even those who had been uncertain joined the movement. When a government fires on its own people, it loses its right to rule. That is what many Iranians believed. The Shah tried everything. He changed prime ministers. He offered reforms. He promised to listen. But the movement had passed the point where promises could stop it. Oil workers went on strike. Government offices emptied. Even soldiers began to switch sides. A military that had been one of the most powerful in the region simply dissolved. When the Shah left in January, many thought things might stabilize. Instead, the moment he was gone, the walls came down completely. The palace was overrun. State television was taken over. The prisons were opened. In the chaos that followed, Khomeini moved quickly. He had a plan, and he executed it. The clerics took control, not just of the government, but of the courts, the military, the schools, the media, and the streets. Iran became, in a matter of months, something the world had never quite seen before. A country governed not by politicians, but by religious scholars who believed their authority came directly from God. The Islamic Republic was not just a political system. It was a theology, and it made enemies from the very first day. Chapter 4: The Hostage Crisis. 444 days that poisoned everything. November 4th, 1979. Tehran. A crowd of students stormed the walls of the American embassy. They called themselves the Muslim student followers of the Imam's line. They were young, angry, and absolutely certain they were doing the right thing. Inside the embassy, 66 Americans were taken hostage. Diplomats, military personnel, staff workers. Some were blindfolded and paraded in front of cameras. All of them were held in conditions of fear and humiliation. The students had one main demand. The United States must return the Shah to Iran so he could face trial. President Jimmy Carter had allowed the Shah, who was sick with cancer, to enter the United States for medical treatment. To many Iranians, this was the same as sheltering a criminal. It felt like a sign that America might try to put the Shah back in power, just as it had done in 1953. Carter refused to hand over the Shah. Negotiations went nowhere. A military rescue mission was attempted and failed catastrophically in the Iranian desert, killing 8 American soldiers without freeing a single hostage. The crisis went on for 444 days. It destroyed Carter's presidency. On the very day Carter's successor, Ronald Reagan, was sworn into office, the hostages were released. Many have wondered ever since whether there was a secret agreement between Reagan's team and the Iranians to delay the release. Those questions have never been fully answered, but the damage was done. The hostage crisis did not just humiliate America. It hardened something permanent. It created a level of mistrust between Washington and Tehran so deep that it would shape Middle East policy for the next half-century. America broke off diplomatic relations with Iran on April 7, 1980. Those relations have never been fully restored. To this day, the two countries do not have embassies in each other's capitals. They do not have normal diplomatic channels. Every conversation happens through intermediaries, through back channels, through whispers. This is what 444 days did. Chapter 5. The birth of Hezbollah. Iran goes to war by proxy. When Israel invaded Lebanon in June 1982, it believed it was going after one enemy, the Palestine Liberation Organization. It accidentally created a far more dangerous one. Israel's military moved all the way to Beirut. It pushed the PLO out of Lebanon, and then it stayed. The occupation of southern Lebanon turned the Shia Muslim population against Israel, and Iran saw its opportunity. Approximately 1,500 Iranian Revolutionary Guards traveled to Lebanon's Bekaa Valley with Syria's permission. They did not come to fight directly. They came to build. They found small, scattered Shia militant groups and began to unify them. They provided weapons, money, training, and most importantly, an ideology. The groups were fused into a single organization. Its name was Hezbollah, the Party of God. Hezbollah was not like other armed groups. It was simultaneously a militia, a political party, a social service organization, and a religious movement. It built schools and hospitals in areas the Lebanese government had neglected. It gave jobs to the poor. It provided identity and dignity to a community that had long felt ignored. And it was absolutely devoted to Iran. In 1983, a suicide bomber drove a truck into the U.S. Marine barracks in Beirut, killing 241 American soldiers. Another truck hit a French military compound the same day, killing 58. The attacks were linked to a group that would later be absorbed into Hezbollah. The Americans left Lebanon. The French left. Hezbollah had demonstrated something remarkable. A small group could drive away a superpower. For Iran, Hezbollah was more than just an ally. It was a weapon, a forward position, a way of threatening Israel and America without directly engaging either of them. Iran had learned the lesson of the hostage crisis. Direct confrontation with America was costly. Proxy warfare was far more effective. From that point on, Iran began to build a network of allied militias and armed groups across the entire Middle East. Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas in Gaza, the Houthis in Yemen, various Shia militias in Iraq. This network would one day be called the Axis of Resistance. Tehran called it self-defense. Washington and Jerusalem called it terrorism. Both were at least partly right. Chapter 6. The Iran-Iraq War. When America chose sides. In September 1980, while Americans were still being held hostage in Tehran, Iraq invaded Iran. Saddam Hussein saw an opportunity. The Iranian military had been gutted by the revolution. The new government was weak and chaotic. He believed he could take territory quickly, humiliate Khomeini, and perhaps even topple the new Islamic Republic. He was wrong. The war lasted 8 years. It killed approximately 1 million people. It became one of the bloodiest conflicts since World War II. What is less remembered is the role America played. America did not like Saddam Hussein, but America liked Khomeini even less. And so Washington began quietly supporting Iraq. American intelligence was shared with Baghdad. American companies sold materials that could be used in chemical weapons production. When Iraq used poison gas against Iranian soldiers, killing thousands, Washington looked away. Later, those same chemical weapons would be used against the Kurdish population of Iraq in one of the worst atrocities of the 20th century. Iran never forgot that America helped the country that was killing its people. The war ended in 1988 in a stalemate. No winner, no meaningful border changes, only the dead. But it had hardened Iran's government. In a strange way, the war had done for Khomeini what the revolution alone could not. It had united the Iranian people behind the Islamic Republic. The external threat became internal glue, and it left Iran with a conviction that would guide its policy for decades afterward. If you want to survive in this neighborhood, you need to be strong. You need allies. You need deterrence. You need a bomb. Chapter 7. The Madrid Conference and the Oslo Accords. Peace that almost was. In the early 1990s, something remarkable happened in the Middle East. People started talking. The end of the Cold War, the Gulf War of 1991, and the first Palestinian Intifada had shifted the landscape. Suddenly, there was political space that hadn't existed before. In October 1991, the Madrid Peace Conference brought together for the first time Israel, Palestinians, Jordan, Syria, and Lebanon in the same room. The United States and the Soviet Union co-sponsored the talks. It was awkward, tense, and deeply uncertain, but it was a beginning. Then, 2 years later, came something that shocked the world. Oslo. On September 13th, 1993, on the lawn of the White House, Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin and PLO Chairman Yasser Arafat shook hands in front of the entire world. President Bill Clinton stood between them, arms wide, as if holding the moment open. The Oslo Accords were a framework, not a final peace agreement, but a path toward one. The PLO recognized Israel's right to exist. Israel recognized the PLO as the representative of the Palestinian people. The Palestinians were promised self-governance in the West Bank and Gaza Strip. It seemed like the impossible had become possible. Iran was furious. The Oslo Accords represented exactly what Tehran feared: a settlement, normalization. Peace between Israel and its neighbors would have isolated Iran and destroyed its narrative that Israel must be eliminated. So Iran went to work undermining it. Hamas, which Iran supported, launched a wave of suicide bombings inside Israel specifically designed to derail the peace process. They were devastatingly effective at poisoning trust. Then, on November 4th, 1995, Yitzhak Rabin was assassinated, not by an Arab militant, but by a Jewish extremist named Yigal Amir, who believed that giving land to Palestinians was a sin against God. The murder of Rabin changed everything. The man who had the political courage and the military credibility to make peace with the Palestinians was gone. In the years that followed, the Oslo process slowly collapsed. Israeli settlements in the West Bank expanded. Palestinian trust in negotiations eroded. The Second Intifada broke out in 2000. The peace window closed, and Iran, watching from Tehran, believed its analysis had been correct all along. There would be no peace. There would only be resistance. Chapter 8: The Axis of Evil. George W. Bush and the speech that defined an era. January 29, 2002, 9 months after the September 11th attacks. America was still raw, still angry, still searching for enemies. President George W. Bush stood before Congress and delivered his State of the Union address. He said 3 words that would echo for decades: axis of evil. He named 3 countries: Iraq, North Korea, and Iran. Iran was on the list, even though Iran had expressed condolences after September 11th. Iran was on the list, even though Iran had quietly cooperated with American efforts in Afghanistan against the Taliban, whom Iran also opposed. Iran was on the list because it was developing nuclear technology, because it supported Hezbollah, because it was a revolutionary Islamic state that threatened American allies. In Tehran, the speech caused outrage. Iranian reformists who had been trying to build bridges with the West were immediately weakened. Hardliners used the speech as proof that they had been right all along. America was not a partner. America was an enemy. The reformist President Khatami, who had extended a hand toward dialogue, found his position undermined almost overnight. Then in 2003, America invaded Iraq. The justification was weapons of mass destruction. Those weapons were never found. But the war was real, and its consequences were enormous. The removal of Saddam Hussein eliminated Iran's most powerful regional enemy. Iraq, once a Sunni-dominated bulwark against Iranian influence, was now being rebuilt with a Shia-majority government far more sympathetic to Tehran. Iran had not fired a single shot. America had done the work for them, and Iran took careful note. If the lesson of the 1980s was, America will back your enemies, the lesson of 2003 was, America makes catastrophic mistakes. You do not need to fight them directly. You just need to wait. Chapter 9: The Bomb. Iran's nuclear program and the world's greatest fear. At some point in the 1980s, while the Iran-Iraq War was still raging and chemical weapons were killing Iranian soldiers, Iran made a decision. It would build the tools to build a nuclear bomb. Not necessarily the bomb itself, but the capability, the knowledge, the infrastructure, so that if it ever needed one, the technology would be there. This program was kept secret for years. When it was revealed in 2002 by an Iranian opposition group, the world was alarmed. Iran insisted its nuclear program was purely peaceful. It wanted nuclear power for electricity. It wanted the technology for medicine and research. This was its right as a signatory to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. But the evidence told a different story. Iran was enriching uranium to levels far higher than civilian power needed. It was developing long-range ballistic missiles. It was building secret underground facilities hardened against airstrikes. Israel watched all of this with growing dread. For Israel, a nuclear Iran was not just a security problem. It was an existential threat. A country that openly called for Israel's destruction, that armed Israel's enemies, that fired missiles at Israeli territory through its proxies, could not be allowed to have nuclear weapons. The United States and Europe agreed, though they were willing to try diplomacy first. In 2006, United Nations sanctions began. More sanctions followed. By the early 2010s, Iran's economy was in serious pain. Its currency collapsed. Inflation soared. Ordinary Iranians suffered. And yet the enrichment continued. Israel tried other methods. In 2010, a computer worm known as Stuxnet secretly destroyed approximately 1,000 Iranian centrifuges at the Natanz nuclear facility. It was widely believed to be a joint American-Israeli operation. It was described as the world's first digital weapon. Iranian nuclear scientists began dying in targeted assassinations on Iranian streets. Men were shot from motorcycles. Cars exploded. Tehran blamed Israel, and Israel said nothing. But Iran kept building. Chapter 10: The Deal and the Betrayal. By 2013, Iran had elected a new president. Hassan Rouhani was a relative moderate, a cleric with a doctorate from a British university, a man who spoke carefully and thought strategically. Rouhani believed that the nuclear sanctions were destroying Iran unnecessarily. He believed a deal was possible, and he was right. In July 2015, after more than a year of intense negotiations, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action was announced. The JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal. 6 world powers, the United States, United Kingdom, France, Germany, Russia, and China, reached an agreement with Iran. Iran would drastically reduce its stockpile of enriched uranium. It would limit its enrichment to low levels. It would allow intensive international inspections of its nuclear facilities. In exchange, sanctions would be lifted and frozen Iranian assets worth nearly $100 billion would be released. President Obama called it a historic achievement. European leaders praised it. Iran's economy began to recover. Israel called it a catastrophe. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu flew to Washington to address Congress and argue against the deal. He said it gave Iran a legal pathway to a nuclear weapon within 10 to 15 years once the deal's provisions expired. He said it left Iran's missile program and its support for terrorism untouched. He said it rewarded the world's leading state's sponsor of terror. The deal went forward anyway. Then Donald Trump was elected president. On May 8, 2018, Trump withdrew the United States from the JCPOA. He called it the worst deal ever made. He restored maximum pressure sanctions against Iran. He promised to get a better deal, one that addressed missiles and proxy militias, not just nuclear enrichment. That better deal never came. Instead, Iran began methodically dismantling its own commitments. It restarted enrichment. It stockpiled uranium. It blocked IAEA inspectors from some facilities. By 2023, Iran had enough enriched uranium to build multiple nuclear warheads if it chose to take the final step. The window that had briefly opened was now shut. Chapter 11, October 7th, 2023, the day that changed everything. At 6:30 in the morning on October 7th, 2023, the worst attack on Jewish people since the Holocaust began. Hamas fighters broke through the fence surrounding Gaza. They came on motorcycles, in trucks by paraglider. They attacked military bases, kibbutzim, and a music festival. By the end of the day, approximately 1,200 people were dead. Around 250 were taken hostage into Gaza. Iran had long supported Hamas with training, weapons, and financing. Whether Iran knew about and approved the specific October 7th attack has been debated. But there is no question that without Iranian support over many years, Hamas could not have executed an operation of that scale. Israel declared war immediately, and then, gradually, the entire Iranian proxy network activated. Hezbollah in Lebanon began firing rockets at northern Israel. The Houthis in Yemen began attacking Israeli ships and later American vessels in the Red Sea. Iranian-backed militias in Iraq and Syria attacked American military bases more than 200 times. Iran called this coordinated pressure the axis of resistance. Every front was opened. Every proxy played its role. Israel fought on all of them simultaneously. In April 2024, for the first time in history, Iran directly attacked Israel from Iranian soil. More than 300 missiles and drones were launched across the night sky. Israeli air defenses, assisted by American, British, Jordanian, and other forces, intercepted almost all of them. Israel struck back. In October 2024, Israeli aircraft hit targets inside Iran itself, destroying most of Iran's sophisticated Russian-supplied air defense systems. The long shadow war had become something more direct, and the nuclear question, always in the background, was now moving to the center of everything. Chapter 12, The 12-Day War, June 2025. By the spring of 2025, Israel had reached a conclusion. Hamas had been severely degraded. Hezbollah had lost most of its senior leadership. Iran's axis of resistance had been exposed as militarily weaker than it appeared. Syria's Assad had fallen. Iran was more isolated than it had been in decades. And Iran's nuclear program was still running. The International Atomic Energy Agency reported in May 2025 that Iran had accumulated enough enriched uranium to produce 9 nuclear warheads. Iran was the only non-nuclear state in the world producing uranium at that level of enrichment. On June 12, 2025, the IAEA formally declared Iran non-compliant with its nuclear obligations, the first such finding in 20 years. The next day, Israel attacked. Operation Roaring Lion struck Iranian nuclear scientists, military commanders, nuclear facilities, missile storage sites, and air defense systems. The attack was surgical but comprehensive. Iran responded with missiles and drones. But without its advanced air defense systems, which Israel had already destroyed in October 2024, it was vulnerable. On June 22nd, the United States entered the conflict. American B-2 stealth bombers, carrying massive bunker-buster bombs designed specifically to penetrate underground facilities, struck 3 Iranian nuclear sites. The world held its breath. 2 days later, on June 24th, President Trump announced a ceasefire. The 12-day war was over. It had not destroyed Iran's nuclear program completely, but it set it back significantly, and it had demonstrated something important. Iran's deterrence was not what it had seemed. Tehran seethed. It had been humiliated, and humiliation, in this part of the world, is the most dangerous force of all. Chapter 13, February 28th, 2026, Operation Epic Fury. After the 12-day war, the world tried to find a new equilibrium. There were nuclear talks in Istanbul, in Geneva, in Oman. Iran and the United States spoke indirectly through mediators, but there were deep disagreements. America demanded that Iran halt all uranium enrichment. Iran refused. Iran wanted its right to enrichment preserved. America said no. Inside Iran, the regime faced its own crisis. Protests over economic hardship, corruption, and the war's costs were growing. The supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, now in his mid-80s, was seen as increasingly out of touch. And then, on February 26, 2026, the final round of talks in Geneva collapsed. 2 days later, the night sky over Iran erupted. On February 28, 2026, Israel and the United States launched a coordinated campaign unlike anything the Middle East had seen since the Gulf War of 1991. The American operation was called Epic Fury. Israel's was called Roaring Lion. The targets were Iran's nuclear program, its ballistic missile infrastructure, its military leadership, its command and control systems, and the leadership of the Islamic Republic itself. In the opening strikes, Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei was killed. The man who had led Iran for more than 3 decades, who had defined the Islamic Republic's ideology as firmly as Khomeini himself, was gone. The strikes continued. Nearly 2,000 targets were hit in the first days. Iran's air defenses struggled to respond. Its command structure was in chaos. But Iran fired back. 500 ballistic missiles, 2,000 drones, and not just at Israel, but at every country in the region that hosted American forces. Kuwait, Qatar, Bahrain, the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Jordan. Most were intercepted, but not all. The Strait of Hormuz, through which 20% of the world's oil passes, was temporarily disrupted. Global oil prices spiked. Flights across the Middle East were canceled. Shipping rerouted around the entire region. The world economy fell within hours. By early March 2026, the death toll stood at over 1,300 in Iran, more than a dozen in Israel, 6 American soldiers killed, and additional casualties across the Gulf states. And the question that hung over everything, the question no one could answer, was this: what comes next? Chapter 14: The Arab World Between Two Fires. Throughout this story, the Arab world has rarely appeared as a single thing. It is not. It is Saudi Arabia, deeply suspicious of Iran, a Shia power that has spent decades funding and arming Sunni groups across the region and threatening Saudi influence. It is the UAE and Bahrain, small wealthy states that have quietly built relationships with Israel while formally opposing its policies. It is Qatar, which hosts the largest American military base in the region and simultaneously maintains ties with Hamas. It is Jordan, which shares a long border with Israel and has lived with the Palestinian issue at the center of its politics for generations. It is Egypt, the largest Arab country, which made peace with Israel in 1979 and has never been fully forgiven for it by its neighbors, but which has quietly benefited from that peace for decades. It is Iraq, torn between its Shia majority that leans toward Iran and its Arab identity that recoils from Persian dominance. And it is the Palestinian people who have lived at the center of this entire story without any real power over any part of it. Every major outside power has claimed to speak for Palestinians, to fight for them, to protect them. America, Iran, Saudi Arabia. None of them has asked the Palestinians what they actually want. Iran has used the Palestinian cause as a strategic asset. It has funded groups that fight Israel not because Tehran loves Palestinians, but because Palestinians are a useful tool in a larger geopolitical competition. Saudi Arabia has spent decades using Palestinian suffering as a political card while simultaneously suppressing any democratic movements at home. America has called itself a broker for peace while providing Israel with the weapons used in conflicts that killed Palestinian civilians. The Arab world has watched the 2026 strikes on Iran with a mixture of quiet relief and public condemnation. Privately, many Arab governments had long feared Iranian power, Iranian-backed militias on their borders, Houthi drones flying over their cities. Publicly, Arab governments expressed concern for Iran's sovereignty and called for de-escalation. This gap between public and private is one of the defining features of Middle East politics. What leaders say in speeches and what they do in private are often completely different things. Chapter 15: Why the conflict is still not over. Some stories have endings. This one does not. Not yet. Iran's supreme leader is dead. But the Islamic Republic still exists. The Revolutionary Guards still exist. The ideology still exists. Revolutions do not die with one man. Iran's nuclear program has been damaged. But nuclear knowledge cannot be bombed away. The scientists who built the centrifuges are still alive. The plans still exist. The will to rebuild is very much intact. Hezbollah has been weakened, but it still controls territory in Lebanon. It still has fighters. It still has the political infrastructure it has spent 40 years building. Hamas is severely degraded, but the grievance that gave it support, the displacement of Palestinians, the lack of a state, the decades of occupation, none of that has been addressed. The Arab states remain torn between their public positions and their private interests. The Palestinians remain without a state, without justice, without a clear path forward. And the fundamental question that started this whole story in 1953 has not been answered. Who decides what happens in the Middle East? America has spent trillions of dollars and lost thousands of lives trying to shape this region. It has toppled governments and built new ones. It has negotiated deals and torn them up. It has made friends and betrayed them. Israel has fought war after war for its survival. It has made peace with Egypt and Jordan. It has built one of the most powerful military forces in the world. And yet it does not feel safe. It has never felt safe. Iran has survived revolution, an 8-year war, decades of sanctions, assassinations, cyber attacks, and now direct military strikes. It has built a network of allies across the region. It has developed one of the world's most sophisticated missile arsenals, and it is still standing. This is not a story with heroes and villains. Every side has committed acts that cannot be justified. Every side has also suffered losses that cannot be minimized. This is a story about what happens when old wounds are never healed, when injustice is never fully addressed, when power is pursued without wisdom. The Middle East is not a region of savages or extremists. It is a region of ancient civilizations, profound cultures, brilliant people, and terrible decisions by leaders who placed their own power above the lives of those they governed. The bombs that fell in February 2026 did not solve anything. They may have delayed something. They may have changed the balance of power for a time, but they did not answer the question, because the question was never really about nuclear weapons. It was about dignity. It was about sovereignty. It was about who gets to have a future and who does not. Until those questions are answered, this conflict will find new forms, new weapons, new actors, new grievances building on old ones. The hidden war will continue. Closing narration: the fire that waits. The desert does not forget. It holds everything inside it: the old borders and the new, the broken treaties, the unmarked graves, the names of the dead in 100 different languages. Empires have come to this region and called it theirs. The Persians, the Greeks, the Romans, the Ottomans, the British, the Americans. None of them stayed forever. The people of this land have outlasted all of them. They will outlast whatever comes next. But the cost of this particular chapter has been paid in blood. Iranian blood, Israeli blood, American blood, Lebanese blood, Palestinian blood. The blood of people whose names most of the world will never know. History does not move in straight lines. It spirals. It returns. The same patterns repeat in new forms. The question is whether human beings are capable of breaking the cycle. Whether any leader, in any capital, has the courage and the vision to choose something other than more war. History has not given us much reason for hope. But hope is not the same as certainty. Somewhere in Tehran, a young Iranian is studying. A scientist, a poet, a programmer, someone who has never started a war and never wanted one. Somewhere in Tel Aviv, a child is learning. Someone who will grow up asking whether the only way to be safe is to always be at war. Somewhere in Washington, someone is reading a briefing and wondering whether there's a better answer than the one that came before. The hidden war is not hidden anymore. The question now is whether the world finally has the courage to find a different ending.